remember just what guided me this way. Oh, stand unshaken.
Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silvermont, and this is my review of Red Dead Redemption 2, played on the PS4 Pro. I bought this game with my own money as I was a fan of Red Dead Revolver and the first Red Dead Redemption, and this review is neither endorsed nor sponsored in any way, so let's get started. I'll endeavour not to give any spoilers in this review, but if you want to go in 100% blind and just want to know if I like the game, then I would say yes, it's extremely good and you should try it out. Red Dead Redemption 2 is an open-world action-adventure third-person shooter that tells the story of the Vanderlyn gang. Set against the backdrop of the dying Wild West, the United States of America are rapidly becoming civilized, meaning there's no more room for outlaws. Their perceived freedoms coming to an end. The game's protagonist is Arthur Morgan, the gang's chief enforcer, who regards the leader, Dutch Vanderlyn himself, as both a father and brother figure. Set some years before the first Red Dead Redemption, wherein we heard a lot about the gang, this game fleshes them out. The main themes of the game are simple enough to understand. It's in the title, for one. Redemption. It's also commentary on the different natures of man. What can make a man change? Of course, the rapid industrialization and death of the Wild West play a large role, looming throughout the game and overshadowing near every event. The story in Red Dead Redemption 2 is perhaps the best of any game I've played in the last 15 years, with fantastic writing and characterization. I for one do not personally care too much for Wild West settings, any more than I cared for the Victorian horror of Bloodborne, but that doesn't lessen my enjoyment of either game. What I do enjoy are character arcs, the development and fleshing out of characters we are interacting with, and Arthur Morgan's arc is a very satisfying one. The game as a whole is dour. If you've played the first Red Dead Redemption, then you know the fates of many of the characters present, and even if you don't have that knowledge, there is a depressing fog over the game as thick as the mists and fogs you'll literally come across in the physical world. Whilst the towns and cities are growing and thriving, decline is everywhere. We are witness to things considered absolutes, rusting all the same, inevitably, slowly. Personal relationships crumble, mental or physical well-beings deteriorating, addictions to opioids, alcohols, or even to narcissism. There are as many ailments in the story as there are things to do in the game, that is to say, a lot. What I'm getting at here is that it's a very somber game. The tone is depressing and dark without coming across as farcical, a sign of good writing. Many other games or films would opt for dark and grungy environments full of dripping sewers or prisons, for example. But Red Dead takes place in a breathtakingly beautiful rendition of North America. Yet, the game is also clever enough to let you take away what you will without being beaten over the head by some hand-fisted message. To me, it is a depressing game, a depressing story, yes, but there are moments of optimism that shine through to make it all worthwhile. There are, of course, subjective and objective ways to classify things, and I can tell you on the subjective front, the story of Red Dead 2 left me unable to stop thinking about it once the credits had rolled. There aren't many stories that have left me in that way, to the point of sticking with me enough that I'm having trouble sleeping because I can't stop thinking about it. But will it have the same impact on you? Maybe, maybe not. Some people were left an emotionally wrecked mess by Nier Automata, but to me I beat that game and thought nothing more of it. So these things are subjective, but let's talk more about the actual gameplay. If you've played any recent Grand Theft Auto or the first Red Dead Redemption, you'll have an idea of what to expect here. You have an enormous open world to explore, and you go to characters on the map that can initiate missions that can also progress the story. There are main missions and optional missions. Outside of these, you will encounter strangers in the world, which work similar to optional missions, only you generally have to stumble upon them. In addition, whilst you are moving through the open world, random events can trigger. For example, you might be riding your horse between two towns and somebody will come the other way with a person hog-tied on their horse, screaming for help. Do you intervene or not? Up to you. There's many of these types of events, and although I have obviously seen a few repeats, I think there's enough, especially as sometimes you'll get the same event but with slight variations. Let's say you come across a man tending to his horse and you go over to have a look. I've seen 2 different things that can play out, for example, on that one event. Elsewise, I had grown sick of open world games lately, as so many of them had been generic cut and paste jobs. Ubisoft, in particular, are the masters of this, as it seems they make nothing but open world games these days that are all vaguely reskinned from each other. Red Dead Redemption 2 actually feels like it's evolving the open world idea, rather like Breath of the Wild. What made Zelda's open world feel so great to me was the urge to explore, the freedom I was given, unfettered access to climb every mountain. In Red Dead, the evolution comes from a more living and breathing world. Because in Zelda, whilst the open world was great, other aspects had suffered, perhaps because of that. Red Dead fortunately doesn't have that same issue, even if the world's exploration is not quite as freeform. And I know the term living, breathing world is thrown around a lot, but Red Dead 2 is the first game that actually makes me feel that. The world is huge, and it is beautiful, and it is full of colourful animals and individuals. There's something like 80 species of animal in the game, which you can observe, hunt, and skin. But if you don't want to craft and hunt, you don't have to. Many buildings in the game can be entered as well, something I very much enjoy as it adds a lot to the immersion for me. I'm trying not to spoil things with this review, but there are areas of the game that were legitimately so impressive I just found myself walking around and taking in the detail and the atmosphere. And atmosphere is something this game has nailed better than perhaps any other I've played. The world is huge, and your methods of traversal are walking, horsing, trains and coach. At your camp you can obtain the ability to quick travel from your camp to certain areas, and when you're on your horse you can set a destination and let your horse drive itself automatically, which is done by just setting a waypoint and then entering the cinematic camera. It's a really nice addition. I played the entire game outside of I think 2 missions that involve stealth with the mini-map off, and I would highly encourage doing the same. Too many games we play by staring at the mini-map and following GPS waypoints. Why stare at a little 2D map when we can look at all these amazingly rendered assets? But as a nice addition, you can tap down on the D-pad at any time to make the minimap pop up for a moment, just in case you need to check your bearings. But navigating using the world and its landmarks, I found that very satisfying. So we have main missions, side missions and whatnot, as well as other activities we can partake in. There's various gambling mini-games, for example. You can do chores around camp, such as cutting wood and filling water buckets. Hunting and fishing are available too. And this camp I keep talking about? It plays a very interesting role in the game. You can return to it at almost any point, and there'll be usually the same but also sometimes slightly different characters milling about. Vanderland Gang will establish camp at some place in the world to which you can return to, and then you can interact with the other members and watch their interactions with each other. And I must point out these interactions were very impressive to me in the scripting and how natural they felt. Combat in the game is primarily gun-based, although there are fistfights and there's melee weapons and there's stealth segments, along with mounted horse combat and a few sparse turret sequences. You have revolvers, repeaters, rifles, shotguns, and so forth. I enjoy how every weapon seems to have its own real strengths in this game, compared with, say, most first-person shooters or shooters in general where, frankly, you can go with an assault rifle and never need anything else. Weapons can be customized, giving them engravings and other aesthetic details which give you no tactical advantage whatsoever. You can also customize things like the barrel length, rifling, and whatnot. Whilst not a weapon as such, your horse is another tool for your journey. and the game has a large number of different breeds and variations, and horses can likewise be customised to have better saddles and stirrups, to even braiding their mane and tail if you're into that. Incidentally, the main horse I used for most of the game was a pure white Arabian that I named Lil Silver, because she was very small, and Silver is a good name for a horse. On that note, I am not a horse, do not call me Silver. The gunplay and general controls felt clunky to me at first, because the game has a very deliberate style of movement, but eventually it felt extremely satisfying and I enjoyed it a great deal. The game's unique mechanic would be the Deadeye System. Effectively, you can slow down time and take shots at enemies. You can paint targets on them on different parts of their bodies, and the Deadeye upgrades over the course of the game. And there's a slight RPG system in place in that you can upgrade your 3 primary stats manually, stamina, health and Deadeye, by doing things such as running or physical exertion, fist fighting, hunting, things like that. Other RPG aspects of changing your character would be managing his weight. Eating too much or too little can make your character fat or thin. This has very mild impacts on the actual gameplay, so if you want to, you can honestly ignore it if it's not something you're into. Same with bathing. You can bathe your character if you want, but you won't fail the game if you forget to take a bath. You can also change your character's clothes and appearance. Hair and beard growth happen in real time, so to speak. They will grow over the course of the game and can be trimmed and styled. Clothes can be bought and stored on your horse, and all items are stored in your wardrobe at camp, and can even be modified in the sense that you can roll your sleeves up, have your trousers over or under your boots. And clothing has also a very mild effect on the gameplay, in that if you're in an extremely cold area, then you probably want to be wearing warmer clothes, or your stamina will probably drain faster, for example. As for presentation, the game uses music quite sparingly and to great effect. The soundtrack is used perfectly, and the sound design in general is great. I played with headphones for a few hours just to see what it was like, and I enjoyed it a lot. Important sounds will often be a bit louder than realistically they should be. Let's say you're moving through a forest and you hear someone screaming. The scream will be a lot closer, it will sound a lot closer than it actually is, but that's primarily to draw your attention to an event being triggered. As for the visuals, the game looks amazing. The sheer level of detail on display here is insane to me. And if there's anything I could find fault in, it's hard to think of, but some of the fog effects, such as when light is shining through trees and interacting with mist or fog, it looks a little blocky or low res. But that's honestly one of the only things I noticed that didn't look stellar. I never noticed the frame rate dipping, and even going from like 100 plus frame rate games on my PC to the 30 frame rate on PS4 Pro, I honestly didn't notice the 30 FPS because it felt smooth enough thanks to the use of motion blur and the like. As with many open world games, it's fair to expect bugs or anomalies. I didn't encounter very many. The worst that happened to me was at one point the game deleted one of my weapons for some reason. I also encountered an invisible person who started attacking me, which I assume is a bug and not some sort of actual invisible man. So is there anything wrong with this game? Well, the pacing can suffer a little at times around the last third of the game, give or take. Not every character in the gang is as fleshed out as they could be, given the length of the game. Some of them are quite two-dimensional, but at the same time, for the sake of the story, they don't really have to be. They're just there to provide extra flavour to the camp atmosphere. The gameplay controls definitely have a weird sense of weight and momentum to them, which I don't believe is a bad thing, but subjectively speaking, I can see why it would turn some people off, as it can give the game a somewhat unresponsive feeling. It's something I've spoken of about before. If you turn around in real life, you probably aren't going to pivot on the spot like we do in video games. They were going for realism here, but realism isn't always the player's friend. Witcher 3 implemented a different movement scheme that was more responsive but less realistic, and maybe Red Dead would benefit from something similar, to be honest. That said, it never really inconvenienced me. In addition to this, it plays into the seamless cutscene transitions, which the game uses frequently and to amazing effect. Sometimes the gameplay is so cinematic, with perfect framing of shots, that it looks like a cutscene. Not many games manage to be cinematic during gameplay. Now of course, when we have these transitions from gameplay to cutscene, sometimes you have instances of weird movement where the character has to sort of shuffle into position. And sure, they are there, but they are very rare, or at least they were for me. Perhaps my biggest problem with the game, well, it wasn't even really the game's fault to an extent. There are elements of the game that really make it feel like it was designed solely for people with 70-inch TVs. HUD and UI elements that are so damn minuscule, I couldn't make them out. I should point out, my TV is 32 inches, and I sit kind of far away from it. It's the ideal distance for watching TV, but not for a game like this. Again, it's sort of my fault here, but also sort of the game's fault for not letting us scale the UI at all. There are some colorblind options, which is great, although they're not perfect. If I were playing it on my PC monitor, it would be fine as I sit a lot closer to that. But for a TV, well, I guess at some point I need to buy a massive one. Feel free to contribute to my Patreon. The game also has, high dynamic range, HDR, but I've heard that it's not implemented very well. Can't comment on that because I don't have an HDR TV. There are aspects concerning the final acts of the game that could arguably be criticised, but I don't personally agree with the sentiments even though I fully understand and sympathise with them. But for the most part, there's very little for me to criticise about the game. Rockstar spent an obscene amount of money on their game, and it comes across in the level of polish and quality and detail. Not just that, the story was one I thoroughly enjoyed, and the gameplay was satisfying. I love to reload during a battle.
There's nothing like the feeling of slamming a long silver bullet into a well-greased chamber.
Then there's Red Dead Online, which is included in the game but isn't currently up. I actually forgot it even exists. Even without it, this game is well worth the asking price in my opinion. I hear Expo Next is the way to go if you want the best performance as it's native 4K. There's sadly no PC version at the moment, maybe one day, I hope. Red Dead Online will be a good time, I'm sure, but we'll wait and see there. If you own a console that can play it, I heartily recommend Red Dead Redemption 2. If you haven't played the first game, that's not a problem, and when I say the first game I mean Red Dead Redemption, not Red Dead Revolver, which is mostly unrelated. You don't need to play Red Dead Redemption to enjoy this one, but it will certainly enhance the experience to some degree. Hell, maybe it would even be better playing Red Dead Redemption 2 than the first game. Seeing characters, events and areas that were mentioned. Well, that about does it. I hope you enjoyed this review or found it useful. Let me know what you thought about this review and the game itself down in the comments. Until next time, take care boy.